We're back with Joe Oliver in a badly lit Orlando studio. Sorry about that lighting down there, Joe, and thank you very much. Hey, it looks a lot better now that they worked on it. So look, we left it with you and Charles Blow here in New York discussing this thing you said about what it is that George Zimmerman, your friend, said on the 911 tapes. I think, remember, there's two words there, Joe. There's two words. He doesn't just say goons, as you might like to think it is. And I noticed that in one of your interviews you said that your 17-year-old daughter has listened to it repeatedly. And she tells you, and she tells you that she loves George, but she's heard it both ways.
And I've heard it both ways as well.
So you've heard it with your own ears in the most offensive possible way.
I've heard it both ways listening to it.
And remember the word that comes before it, effing. Effing. That's not a word that tends to lead into a loving term.
You know, and goons has also been used as an insult to people as well.
Yes, it has. But which one do you think is worse for an African American?
Well, of course the other one's worse for an African American.
But why would you try to justify it and pretend it's an innocent thing on hardball?
I'm not trying to justify it.
What I'm trying to point
out, what I'm
you
trying
would
to
agree
point
that
out,
that's a terrible thing for George Zimmerman to have said, if he said it.
That's right. It is a terrible thing if he said it.
All right,
but what I'm trying to point out is that George Zimmerman is not a racist.
We're going to move on for Joe. We're going to let everyone listen to that tape themselves. I've said what I've heard. I heard the worst word that you could hear on that tape. You've heard both. That's okay. I accept that from you. We don't have to argue it anymore. And I'm glad we've moved off that stuff you were saying about it yesterday. I want to bring in Jonathan Capehart of the Washington Post, who's been covering this very closely, Joe. And he's in Washington, going to join us by satellite. He has some questions for you, too.
Hi, Mr. Oliver. Thanks for being here. So you've said that you've known George Zimmerman for 6 years.
Yes.
And one of the things that we know about George Zimmerman is that he's wanted to be in law enforcement. In fact, you just said in the beginning of the interview that he was a criminal justice major, right?
Correct.
So did he ever talk to you about his desire to be in law enforcement?
Yeah, we talked about it briefly, about what he was majoring in and what he wanted to do with his future. And basically he generalized it in that he was a criminal justice major and he wanted to do something in law.
But did he specify what exactly? Because law enforcement is a very large field.
Yeah, I mean, he specified that, he wanted to try and get into police work and possibly become a lawyer.
Mm-hmm. And so possibly get into police work. Did he try?
I don't know if he did. I want to point out, and I'll clarify my relationship with George, because the characterization has been as a close friend. I'm being described as a close friend because I'm the only one who's speaking out for him. But my relationship with George is more of an older uncle. I'm old enough to be his father.
Well, right. Well, all the more reason for him to confide in you and to talk to you and to seek advice about all of life's mysteries. So, I mean, I think the questions I'm asking, they should be questions you ought to be able to answer as someone who is an uncle figure or a mentor, someone older than George.
Yeah, we've had those discussions before at family gatherings. But you have to understand that at those family gatherings, George was probably the only one who wasn't drinking, for one. For another, the discussions that you're talking about that you think we should have had in order to validate whether or not I, should be here talking on his behalf, those are discussions I'm sure he had with his father. I mean, the discussions that I've had with George have been, in general, have been about our mutual acquaintances, about what's going on with each other.
So you're not,
and it's not something that you're going to take notes about. So
Mr. Oliver, just to be clear, so you're not a close friend of George Zimmerman's. At best, judging by your last answer, you're really just an acquaintance.
Well, the close was not ever my term. That close term was coined ever since I came forward to speak on his behalf.
Okay, wait, I'm sorry.
Go ahead,
sorry, Lawrence. I know this is your show.
Go ahead.
So George Zimmerman never talked to you about being a part of the neighborhood watch, about what that meant to him, about what it meant to him to serve his community. He never talked to you about that?
I've never asked him specifically, what that meant for him to do it, but
he never volunteered it.
No, because I never asked.
Joe, it's Lawrence O'Donnell here. I have to say, I've never used the phrase close friend because I didn't have enough evidence to indicate you were a close friend. And when I discovered today that you both were, in my own investigation, that you both were in the same workplace, that seemed to be the only place where you might find yourself in a situation alone with him, because you've been saying that all your gatherings with him have been family-based. But, Joe, this is the problem. The problem is that you've identified on this show that the only reason you believe George Zimmerman's account of what happened is your own personal gut feeling. That is not good enough for America, Joe, and you have to know that. That is not good enough for a jury, Joe, and you have to know that. You have to know, Joe, that you would not be a witness in this case.
Oh, I don't want to be a witness in this case.
Well, you may be, Joe, you may be, because you had an unprotected conversation with him on Saturday that is relevant to the case, and so you should be subpoenaed and questioned under oath about exactly what he talked to you about. And if you're not, that's an incompetent investigation going on in Florida. Has anyone reached out to you from law enforcement since you publicly said you had a conversation with Zimmerman on Saturday and asked to interview you and put you under oath about that conversation?
No, no one has.
Joe, you're a mystery man to me, because you're doing this on such a slim basis of a gut feeling. You've given up your job. I don't understand how you give up your job and your income to go out here and do this public relations job for George Zimmerman. I don't understand how you can afford to do this. It's strange seeming behavior, Joe. It doesn't add up to me. And then yesterday on Hardball, you were saying these wildly nutty things about that racial slur, just anything you could say to defend this guy on the basis of nothing but a gut feeling. Your role in this, Joe, just doesn't make sense to me.
Well, it just doesn't make sense. And I'll agree with you. My role in this, I agree, just doesn't make sense. But because of the person that I know, that I've grown to know over the past years, that, I've seen even more since you've, revealed that we are co-workers, since he got his job, that, you've got to validate for yourself and reconcile for yourself whether or not this is a bad person. Well, this is not a bad person. This is a very good person who grew from his previous mistakes some 7 years ago. And if you ever got to know him, you wouldn't even suspect that he had those problems some 7 years ago.
We got to go. But listen, you've told us you don't even have a consistent story. You've told us you don't know what his mistakes were. Then you tell us he grew from them. Then you tell us you're not sure if he did anger management. Then you're pretty sure he did do anger management. You know about the arrest. You don't know if his current wife knew about his previous fiance's violent complaints against him and the injunction against him that the previous fiance got. There's so much you don't know, Joe, and you want America. You go on national television like this, CNN, all these other shows, and you say to America, believe me, I can vouch for the man who shot and killed Trayvon Martin, because I, Joe Oliver, have a completely inexplicable and unjustifiable gut feeling. Joe, it is not good enough for America.
It is good enough for me.
Okay.
You can't even say that it predates what you know of him, because you say you know him for the last 6 years. That is a period over which he has called 911 on people in his community for 46 times. Did he talk to you about any of those 46 times that he called 911 on people in that community, yes or no?
Why would he?
So that's right. You don't know this man.
Joe,
Thank you.
Joe Oliver, we're gone way into overtime.
And you don't know this man either.
I don't know it, but I'm not on television claiming to know him. That is what you are doing, sir. I am not claiming to know anybody in this case. I have never met Trayvon Martin. I have never met George Zimmerman. You are claiming to be a friend or confidant or whatever, or uncle or whatever you are claiming to be for George Zimmerman, and you don't know anything about George Zimmerman. You don't know that he's on the phone all the time thinking that people are suspicious of whether or not they're 7 or 9 years old playing in a driveway, or whether he's calling on Trayvon Martin. You don't know George Zimmerman. You know a little bit about this guy, and you're relating something based, like you said, on a gut feeling, because like you said, you would not describe yourself as a close friend of George Zimmerman, and that's it.
And I know enough about George Zimmerman to put myself in this position.
Okay, Joe, I want to thank you very much for coming in tonight. You can go off and do other television interviews, and they're all going to be easier than this one, and you knew that before this one started. I appreciate you coming in and doing this tonight. It was more than the lawyer representing George Zimmerman was willing to do last night. He ran out of that chair that you're sitting in tonight, and I thank you very much for staying with us and doing this extra time with us tonight. Joe Oliver, I think you've clarified a lot about what your position on this comes from. Joe, thank you very much for joining us.
You're welcome.
Okay. We're going to take a break right here. We're going to be back with our panel. We're going to be joined by Jonathan Capehart, Natalie Jackson, who's one of the attorneys for the family, and, of course, Charles Blow, and we will get to Rachel Maddow.